South Africa, look at South Africa, what's going on. Look at South America, what's going on. You know, I'm not going to, we have a G20 meeting in South Africa. South Africa shouldn't even be in the Gs anymore because what's happened there is bad. I'm not going. I told him I'm not going. I'm not going to represent our country there. It shouldn't be there.
When Donald Trump announced that the United States would boycott the G20 Summit in Johannesburg, it wasn't just another political tantrum. It was a declaration of fear. Fear of a world shifting southward. Fear of an Africa that no longer needs Western permission to lead. He claimed white South Africans were being slaughtered, a myth long discredited by courts, researchers, and even Afrikaner leaders themselves. But that lie wasn't aimed at South Africa. It was aimed at his audience to rekindle a colonial fantasy where the West still plays savior and Africa stays silent. Yet South Africa didn't take the bait. It simply said, "We'll move on without the United States." That calm confidence changed everything. Because this G20 isn't about America's absence, it's about Africa's arrival. For the first time, the global economy is meeting on African soil, and history is watching who shows up. So, will the boycott work? Let's find out. Power rarely exists quietly. It slams the door, raises its voice, and pretends it's still in control. That's exactly what Donald Trump did when he announced that the United States would boycott the G20 Summit in Johannesburg. The reason, he claimed, was white genocide in South Africa, a claim so absurd that even South African opposition parties and Afrikaner leaders called it fiction. But the absurdity isn't the story. The story is why Trump felt the need to say it. Because this wasn't foreign policy. It was a performance, and every performance needs an audience.
At the same time, U.S. President Donald Trump says no U.S. official will attend the G20 Leaders Summit in South Africa as long as Afrikaners are being killed in South Africa. SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Peace reports from New York that is critiquing South Africa. Trump said he looked forward to hosting the G20 in Miami next year.
Trump wasn't talking to the world. He was talking to his base, to the section of America that sees every global shift as a personal insult. He wasn't defending white South Africans. He was defending the mythology of white innocence, a narrative that lets the West pretend it's still the world's moral compass, even as its influence erodes. The boycott was the political equivalent of a tantrum. Loud, dramatic, but ultimately powerless. If Trump truly believed his own rhetoric, he would have attended the summit, raised his grievances face to face, and led by evidence. But leadership is risky. Performance isn't. So he chose the stage over the table, the slogan over the solution. And in doing so, he accidentally exposed the real crisis, not in South Africa, but in America's own identity. Let's be honest, this boycott isn't about concern for human rights, it's about control. For over a century, Western powers have defined Africa's legitimacy by their approval. When they praise you, you're reforming. When they criticize you, you're failing. When they ignore you, you're irrelevant. But South Africa didn't play that game. Its response was surgical. We will move on without the United States. Just 9 words, and every one of them landed like a hammer on Western ego. Because that sentence did something revolutionary. It shifted the center of gravity. For decades, Africa has been treated as a guest in global conversations, expected to nod politely and wait for permission to speak. But this time, the host said to the guest, "You don't have to come." And that flipped everything. It's not America excluding Africa anymore. It's Africa realizing it doesn't need America to proceed. The G20 will still meet. World leaders will still arrive. Trade will still happen. The only thing missing will be Washington's shadow, and that's precisely what frightens it. Because when you've built your authority on being indispensable, irrelevance feels like death. Trump's boycott was never about saving anyone. It was about refusing to confront a future where Africa stands as an equal, not a dependent. And that's why this moment matters. It marks a turning point when the empire finally looked south, saw confidence instead of chaos, and panicked. But here's the real question. Why revive a colonial myth, the so-called white genocide, right now, just as Africa begins to rise? What's really at stake behind that convenient lie? If history teaches us anything, it's that when power loses its grip, it reaches for mythology. The white genocide narrative that Trump keeps shouting about is not new. It's a recycled colonial ghost, wrapped in the modern language of victimhood. During apartheid, the same fear was used to justify segregation. White South Africans were told that if the black majority ever took control, chaos would consume the country. That fear was the oxygen that kept racism alive. Today, Trump has simply exported that lie to a new audience, his own.
Now, the ANC has condemned US President Donald Trump's claims of genocide and persecution of white South Africans, along with his boycott of the G20 Summit in South Africa.
He isn't protecting white South Africans. He's performing for white Americans. The myth serves as emotional therapy for a nation terrified by its own demographic and moral decline. It gives the illusion that whiteness is under siege, not by injustice, but by equality. It tells Trump's followers that they are not privileged, just misunderstood victims of global reverse racism. And so Africa becomes the stage for America's racial insecurities. But myths crumble when confronted with data. In South Africa, murder and crime affect everyone, rich and poor, black and white, rural and urban. The majority of murder victims are black South Africans, not white farmers. There is no pattern, no policy, no genocide. The courts have said it. Human rights organizations have said it. Even white political groups have said it. But Trump doesn't care about facts. He cares about feelings, specifically the kind that make his base nostalgic for dominance. And that's the genius of this lie. It doesn't seek to convince. It seeks to comfort. It tells people what they want to believe. That equality is dangerous, that African success is suspicious, that Western decline must be someone else's fault. When Trump says, white farmers are being slaughtered, he isn't describing reality. He's offering a fantasy where the West still owns the moral script and Africa remains the villain. But here's what's really clever and dangerous about this narrative. It flips morality upside down. It makes the historical oppressor the eternal victim and the liberated the perpetual threat. It's colonial logic dressed up as compassion. By pretending to care about human rights, it rebrands superiority as sympathy. And yet, the timing gives the truth away. Every time Africa asserts its sovereignty, when it joined BRICS, when it pushed for local currency trade, when it hosted the G20, this narrative resurfaces like clockwork. Because Western powers don't fear African failure, they fear African independence. That's why South Africa's calm response was so devastating to the myth. Pretoria didn't rage or plead. It simply dismantled the lie with facts and moved on. And in that moment, it broke a centuries-old rule. Africa didn't defend itself through emotion. It defended itself through intellect. But that poses the next question. How does a nation maintain composure under such deliberate provocation? How did South Africa turn an international smear campaign into a masterclass in psychological control? Sometimes silence is the loudest form of resistance. When South Africa's foreign ministry responded to Trump's boycott by calmly stating that the success of the summit will not rest on one member state, it wasn't just a press release, it was a psychological maneuver. The statement didn't attack or defend, it reframed the entire situation. In diplomacy, that's called control through indifference. By refusing to enter the emotional theater Trump was trying to stage, Pretoria stripped his words of oxygen. Trump thrives on outrage. It's his currency. Every angry response gives him more power, more airtime, more chaos to manipulate. South Africa, however, played the opposite game. It denied him drama. It denied him spectacle. That's not weakness, that's strategy. Because when you refuse to fight inside your opponent's story, you write your own. This composure didn't appear overnight. It comes from a hard-earned national maturity. South Africa is a country that faced down one of the most sophisticated propaganda machines in modern history, apartheid. Decades of lies told the world that black liberation would destroy the nation. It didn't. The same discipline that guided the transition from apartheid to democracy, a patience forged through pain, is what allows South Africa to remain composed now. So, when Trump throws wild accusations, the South African government doesn't tremble. It doesn't need to. It has seen worse. It has lived through decades of foreign manipulation, economic sabotage, and moral lecturing from the same powers that once funded its oppressors. Why should it now lose sleep over the tantrum of a single Western president?
Well, clearly it looks like he doesn't understand what the G20 is, but I don't blame him because he wasn't there when the group was established.
And yet South Africa's response was not just restraint, it was a declaration of quiet authority. By focusing on the purpose of the summit rather than the personality of the boycott, Pretoria reminded the world that the G20 isn't an American show, it's a global one. That subtle shift redefined the power balance. For the first time, Africa wasn't the audience, it was the stage. Psychologically, this is what experts call frame reversal. Trump's goal was to make South Africa look unstable. Instead, his absence made him look insecure. The optics tell the story. A confident African nation preparing to host the world's largest economies, while the self-proclaimed leader of the free world sulks on the sidelines. It's poetic justice dressed as politics. Even more powerful was the symbolism of unity within South Africa itself. Political parties, civil organizations, and even Afrikaner groups publicly dismissed Trump's claims. In a country often divided along historical lines, that moment of consensus was extraordinary. It showed that national dignity could override domestic divisions. That unity transformed a potential scandal into a showcase of stability. The message was unmistakable. South Africa can handle itself, and it can host the world without supervision. But this calm defiance unsettles more than just Trump. It shakes the very foundation of Western psychology, the belief that Africa must either be saved or controlled. And that leads to the next question. Why does African equality, not African chaos, make Washington so uncomfortable? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Here's the truth most Western politicians won't say aloud. Africa's independence doesn't scare them because of what it is. It scares them because of what it represents. For centuries, Western power has relied on a specific psychological script. Africa struggles. The West rescues. That dynamic gave the West both moral authority and economic leverage. But what happens when Africa no longer needs rescuing? When it stands tall, unbothered, organizing global summits, building digital economies and leading alliances like BRICS, the script collapses, and with it, the illusion of Western indispensability. Trump's boycott isn't about South Africa's human rights abuses. If that were true, the US wouldn't trade with Saudi Arabia, wouldn't back Israel's bombings, and wouldn't have turned a blind eye to Iraq and Yemen. No, Trump's outrage isn't moral, it's strategic. He's panicking because Africa is breaking free from the emotional leash that's kept it politically obedient for decades. The G20 Summit in Johannesburg is the perfect symbol of that shift. For the first time, Africa isn't being invited to the global table, it's hosting it. That might seem like a technical detail, but in the language of geopolitics, it's revolutionary. When you host the world's most powerful economies, you shape the agenda. And for Washington, that's unacceptable. America is used to setting the tone, not following it. But this year, the tone belongs to Africa. What's more, South Africa's growing influence in BRICS threatens the US-dominated world order. Through BRICS, Africa gains access to development loans free of IMF strings, trade denominated in local currencies instead of dollars, and strategic partnerships that bypass Western intermediaries. This isn't just economics, it's emancipation. The West calls it Chinese influence. Africans call it options. And options are dangerous to anyone used to a monopoly. That's why Washington's panic feels so emotional. It's not rational fear, it's existential dread. Because the same continent once exploited for gold, diamonds, and slaves now holds the minerals that power the next century: lithium, cobalt, and rare earths. The same region, once portrayed as developing, now contains the fastest growing economies in the world. The same people once dismissed as third world are designing digital payment systems and artificial intelligence models. The power dynamic isn't just shifting, it's reversing. So Trump's boycott isn't a foreign policy statement, it's a denial of history. a refusal to accept that Africa is no longer a story told by others, but a story written by itself. The real panic in Washington isn't about South Africa's governance, it's about America's irrelevance. The empire isn't falling because someone conquered it. It's falling because it refused to evolve. And here's the irony. Every attempt to undermine Africa only accelerates its rise. When you ignore a continent that controls the future of energy, minerals, and labor, you don't punish it, you isolate yourself. So the next question isn't whether Africa is rising, that's already happening. The real question is, how will Africa use this moment of independence to transform symbolic leadership into tangible power? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Here's the thing. Every empire, when it begins to fall, looks outward for a scapegoat instead of inward for an explanation. But Africa doesn't need to point fingers anymore, because for the first time in modern history, the global balance of power is tilting toward it, not away. And the irony is that Trump's boycott, meant to insult South Africa, actually proves the point. America no longer has the leverage to stop history. While Washington argues about illusions, Africa is building realities. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, is already reshaping the way 54 nations trade, creating the largest single market since the European Union. For decades, Africa's biggest obstacle wasn't resources, it was fragmentation. Colonial borders turned cooperation into competition. But AfCFTA is quietly erasing those divisions. Goods are moving from Accra to Nairobi, Lagos to Cairo, without dollar dependency or Western mediation. That's not just economic reform, that's mental liberation. Then comes the financial revolution, the new development bank, launched by BRICS, giving African nations an escape route from the IMF's debt traps. Loans now come without the austerity poison pills that have strangled African economies for generations. For once, Africa can build infrastructure without begging for approval. The West calls it Chinese influence. Africans call it what it really is, options. And options are the enemy of control. And while the West still sees Africa through the outdated lens of aid and poverty, a very different story is unfolding on the ground. Across the continent, startups are turning mobile banking into a billion-dollar industry. Kenya's M-Pesa system is studied at Harvard Business School. Nigeria's fintech companies are redefining digital payments. South Africa's green energy sector is now one of the fastest growing in the world, and Egypt's satellites orbit the sky while Rwanda hosts international tech summits. This isn't a continent waiting for development, it's a continent redesigning development itself. The numbers back it up. Africa holds 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 60% of its uncultivated arable land, and the youngest population on Earth. By 2050, 1 in every 4 humans will be African. That's not a statistic, that's destiny. And that destiny terrifies old powers, because it means the West's monopoly on labor, resources, and innovation is over. The 21st century won't be powered by old empires. It'll be powered by African ingenuity. Trump's boycott is, in a way, poetic. It's a man trying to stop the tide with his hands. But the tide doesn't care. The G20 will happen. Deals will be made. Partnerships will grow. And America's absence will only make its weakness visible. Because when you refuse to join a table that's already set, the dinner simply continues without you. And that leads us to the most important question of all. Africa has won moral legitimacy, economic opportunity, and political confidence. But can it now translate those victories into total sovereignty, free from Western validation? There comes a moment in every nation's story when it stops asking to be seen and simply begins to exist, confidently, unapologetically, on its own terms. That's where Africa stands right now. And Trump's boycott of the G20 in Johannesburg, though meant as an insult, became the perfect symbol of that transition. Because when the self-declared leader of the free world refuses to show up, yet the meeting still thrives, it proves something deeper than politics. It proves independence.
South Africa has a lot to benefit in terms of continuing to strengthen its relations with the member states. We know that the European Union as a bloc is supporting the theme. and therefore already you have lobbied support for the country. But secondly, South Africa is able to put the agenda of the South-South on the table with these powerful industrialized nations. And therefore, there are lots of things that you can benefit from. I mean, South Africa is not an island. We are part of BRICS, well and good, but that doesn't mean that we cannot strengthen relationships.
For decades, Africa's power was filtered through foreign lenses, Western analysts, Western banks, Western aid. Progress was measured not by African standards, but by Western comfort. If Africa grew too fast, it was dangerous. If it grew too slowly, it was disappointing. The entire vocabulary of engagement was colonial. Even the compliments came with condescension. But that language is dying now. The G20 Summit in Johannesburg, hosted by an African democracy and attended by every major global player except the US, marked the quiet burial of Western paternalism. Because here's the truth. Africa doesn't need validation. It needs velocity. It doesn't need permission. It needs partnership. And increasingly, it's getting that partnership on its own terms. China invests in manufacturing, not missions. Russia offers military and energy cooperation, not lectures. The UAE and Turkey invest in African infrastructure because they see returns, not charity. Meanwhile, the United States debates myths about white persecution and loses its seat at the grown-ups table. It's not just geopolitics, it's psychology. The West built its identity on the idea of being the world's referee. But what happens when the players start calling their own fouls? The empire loses its script. That's why Western media now clings to narratives of instability, coups, protests, crises, even when the real story is progress. They can't digest an Africa that's stable without supervision, confident without assistance, united without Western mediation. Trump's boycott will be remembered not as defiance but as denial, the moment America accidentally revealed that it can no longer define global legitimacy. South Africa didn't plead for his presence because it didn't need to. The G20 carried on with a new gravitational center, one defined not by the North Atlantic but by the global South. Africa's ideas on trade, debt reform, and sustainable energy are no longer side discussions. They're becoming the main agenda. And that's the shift that changes everything. For centuries, Africa was treated like a child at the world's dinner, fed when convenient, scolded when independent. Now it's not waiting for an invitation, it's hosting the feast. The world's energy future, food security, and digital revolution all run through African corridors, from Zambia's copper to Ghana's tech hubs to South Africa's green industry. So, yes, America can boycott a summit. It can ignore a rising power. But it cannot boycott the century, because the 21st century belongs to builders, not bullies, to creators, not critics, to those who lead with composure, not control. And right now, that leadership speaks with an African voice, confident, measured, and unshaken. The world is not turning away from Africa anymore. It's turning toward it. And this time, Africa isn't just ready, it's in charge. Do you think the West is ready to accept an Africa that no longer needs its approval? Let us know in the comments section. If America can't control the global narrative anymore, who do you think will write it next? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.